How's it going, everybody? I am ZBilbs and I'm back here today with another metal albums ranked video. I'm going over another power metal classic band. This week I have got Kamelot. Now I've been binging through a lot of power metal lately, and this is definitely one that was on my bucket list ever since I heard Awakening, or The Awakening, this last year. That was the first time I'd heard Kamelot, and it was on my top 10 favorite albums of the year list, so I decided time to get to Kamelot. There's obviously still plenty of other classic ones I need to get to, but this is definitely a good band. I would say out of the lately some of the newer power metal, at least the power metal I've heard for the first time, this is on the lower end of how much I liked it. I didn't like Kamelot nearly as much as Stradivarius, but definitely the higher albums on here are really good. But as a whole, a lot of these albums I found a little bit middling, but still a good band, definitely good stuff. But without further ado, let's just get into the ranking. Coming up at my least favorite at 13, I have got Eternity. Now, debut album, for a lot of bands, a debut tends to be a lot of people's favorite. Definitely not the case for Kamelot. Their early stuff is notorious for not being terribly good, or at least not being terribly popular. And that was the case for Stradivarius. Most people don't like their debut, Fright Night. I actually thought it was pretty good, but not Eternity. Where to start with this one? I mean, it's not. I mean, it's kind of bad. It's definitely mediocre. It's not a train wreck. There's some saving graces here and there. The worst thing probably is the vocalist. I mean, I don't even know what this guy's name is. He did the first two albums, and he's not bad, but compared to Roy Khan and Tommy Karavik, he pales in comparison to them. Definitely, they have not figured out their style yet. That wouldn't come until probably Fourth Legacy. And I don't know, this album, it just, not only does it not have the style and not a great vocalist, but it just does not have great songwriting. It doesn't have anything terribly interesting in the instrumental type stuff that they do. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of boring. There's not anything egregious about it. It's just kind of eh. It does have some decent songs. I think Call of the Sea and Red Sands are all right. And then What About Me, I think, is actually a decent kind of more ballady type Camelot song. But as a whole, this whole album is just one giant skip. There's nothing to stand out. It's, just a product of early Camelot, so easily at my last spot. Well, actually, not easily, because this next one isn't great either. Because at 12, I've got Dominion. This is the other first singer guy, whatever his name is, his other album, their second album. And this one isn't much better. It's got basically the exact same problem as Eternity. This one is a little bit better because there's actually one song on this album that I really like. This is the one song from their first singer that I think is a genuine banger. That's Birth of a Hero. Just a great song. I don't know. It's fun. It's catchy. It's upbeat. It doesn't sound like classic Camelot style, but it's still good in its own right. Everything else, not really. Heaven is all right. Other than that, it's basically just one giant skip of an album, just like Eternity. So, yeah. The going from here, there's definitely a step up going into this next album. The bottom two are easily at the bottom. Next up at number 11 might be a controversial one, but I've got Silverthorn. Now, this was the first album that I believe Tommy Karavik did after Roy Khan left, and I'll say right now already that I think both Tommy and Roy are equal in terms of singing quality. I think they're both excellent vocalists, so this has nothing to do with Tommy being a worse singer than Roy. I just think this album, they brought in a new singer. They probably had some kind of new stuff going for it. It feels like they're kind of shifting more and more in their new stuff to a more, I don't know, symphonic style. But I don't know, Camelot has always had kind of a symphonic style, but I don't know what it is. This album I just find incredibly boring. There's one song in this album that I think is interesting and worth coming back to. and that is Sacrimony. But other than that, there's some like decent songs. I like My Confession, Falling Like Fahrenheit, and Solitaire, but none of those are particularly stand out. They're just like good, all right. And everything else I find just kind of boring. Like I like the sound of this album, but I just feel like the actual musicality and just the quality of the songwriting improves as the Tommy Karavik albums go on. This just kind of feels like a dud of an album to me. It's once again, it's not bad. It's just incredibly boring, and other than Sacrimony, I don't come back to anything on this album. But I know this is actually kind of popular for the fans, I think, so let me know in the comments. Why do you guys like this album? What are some of your favorite songs? But yeah. Moving on to number 10, I've got Siege Perilous. This was kind of the last of the, I don't know, the early era. This is, I believe, the first album with Roy Khan at vocals, so there's definitely an upgrade there. But it's the first three are kind of their own thing. They're kind of the pre-actual Kamelot's power metal style, and so they're just all kind of uninteresting. I mean, I enjoy like a different style. If it's not like a band's classic style, sometimes I can still like it, but this just doesn't do it for me. I just, once again, I think the songwriting hasn't quite gotten there yet. There's nothing that really sticks with me. There's a couple of decent songs, just like the other first two albums. Where I Reign, Parting Visions are both solid. Siege is a decent instrumental. King's Eyes is all right, but nothing stand out on this album. I would say it's above the first two just because it's got a better singer, essentially. And I don't know, it's roughly on par with Silverthorn. I could probably flip-flop both of those, but I think, I don't know, this one is maybe slightly more consistent in quality. I don't know, it's not particularly good, but let's move on to something better. Because moving on, another controversial pick. At number 9, I have The Fourth Legacy. Now, like Silverthorn, this one tends to be a fan favorite. I see it high in a lot of fan lists, and I don't really see it. I mean, for one reason, this album has, I believe, at least currently, my favorite all-time Kamelot song on it, that being the title track, Fourth Legacy, is a genuinely spectacular song. But other than that, like, I appreciate, like, it kind of feels like that song is really, like, ushered in the new style of Kamelot, but it wouldn't be until Karma where they really cemented that and brought it to its most full potential. Everything else, it still feels like it's falling to the similar pitfalls as before, where, you know, they're playing it too safe. They're not doing anything as, like, grand and symphonic and epic as later albums would do. Other than Fourth Legacy title track, there isn't too much to write home about, in my opinion. Some other good ones on this album, A Sailorman's Hymn, Alexandria, and Until Kingdom Come are all decent, but none of those are particularly top tier by any means. They're all just kind of okay. So, same thing as I said before. I think obviously it's got a great song on it, but other than that, I find it kind of mediocre. But yeah, sorry. Moving on to number 8, I have Haven. Now, this is definitely, in my opinion, a step in the right direction for the Tommy Karavik era. This kind of just felt like Silverthorn, but a little bit more creative talent put in there, a little bit higher quality of songwriting. It still doesn't have too many, like, absolutely banger songs on there. There's some good stuff in there, but generally I'd say it's like just a decent album with some relatively consistent quality that doesn't reach as high of highs as later albums coming up. Some highlights from this album: Insomnia is probably my favorite on the album. I also really like Beautiful Apocalypse and Liar Liar. Some other solid ones: Under Gray Skies, Veil of Elysium, Fallen Star. So, I mean, it's kind of hit or miss for the rest of the album. It's decently consistent in its quality, more consistent than Silverthorn at least. But this is the first where I would say, like, yeah, like, good album. Nothing particularly stand out, but a solid album overall and a step in the right direction. Moving on to number 7, I've got Ghost Opera. This is definitely just a solid, good Kamelot album. I believe this one came right after Black Halo, so there was. It's definitely a step down from that era. The whole like Karma, Epica, Black Halo. A lot of people, I mean, most people consider like the height of Kamelot, and I wouldn't quite agree with that, but like kind of, sorta. I can see it, and so I think this is still like it's not as good as those, but it's still kind of close. There's definitely some tracks in here that are really solid. Some of the better Kamelot songs overall. Favorites: The Human Stain, Blue Care are both excellent. I think my favorite is Up Through the Ashes. That one's excellent. The title track Ghost Opera is really good. I also like Silence of the Darkness, Eden Echo, Rule the World. So similar to Haven, where it's decently good in its consistency. It's got some solid, like higher tier songs, but nothing stand out enough to get it any higher, and it is a little bit hit or miss here and there. So good album, but not quite good enough to get it in the top tier of Kamelot. Moving on, this is a lot of people's favorite or up there near their favorites. And I think it's about on par with Ghost Opera, honestly, and that's the Black Halo. This was like the duality, not the trilogy, I don't know what you call that, between Epica and the Black Halo, told some like fantasy story. I can't remember what it is, so definitely props for pulling off a cool like concept album with those two. I think the only other concept album Kamelot's done was Silverthorn, which I have no idea what that was about. So obviously I love the running story in here. I also love, I think there was some like darker edge to Kamelot albums before this, but this is the first Kamelot album that had a very clear kind of darker edge to it, where they had some more extreme vocals, or extreme quote unquote. They had Shagrath from Dimmu Borgir do the Mephisto voice, which is really cool, and I love more symphonic, like clean sounding bands that insert that little bit of that dark energy into it. I think it's an excellent combination. Gives me like Enslaved vibes or something. There's some other really great features on here from like Simone Simons or Mari Youngblood. So just definitely in terms of like creativity, this might be the best Kamelot album. So I can understand why people have it as their favorite. Why it's not any higher for me is it is a very long album, and there are some like really good tracks, but there aren't too many absolute top tier tracks. So a little bit less consistent. There's a handful of songs that I think are kind of just filler, and then nothing is too extraordinary for me to put it higher. So I more appreciate this album than I do think it's genuinely great. But yeah, sorry. Highlights on this album: March of Mephisto, excellent way to start. The Lights Are Down, and I think that's like their most popular song. That's a good one. I don't love it, but it's good. I also really like The Haunting, Soul Society, some other good ones, Memento Mori, Serenade, obviously the title track Black Halo is pretty good. But besides, like, I'd say 3 songs on this album are really good. The rest are either good or just okay. So good album, super unique style, super interesting for the concept album and all that. I just personally can't put it any higher than 6. Moving on to number 5, I have The Shadow Theory. Now, we might be getting into a bit of blasphemy here, because I am putting Tommy Karavik albums higher than classic Roy Khan albums. But I do enjoy the new era of Kamelot, and I do think they get better and better as the albums go on. And this was the first album I thought Silverthorn was a swing and a miss. Haven was a step in the right direction, and then the Shadow Theory was another jump in that direction. It's not a great album quite yet, but this is the first like really solid Tommy Karavik album. I think finally the songwriting has come to full fruition. It's got some great top tier tracks. It's got the consistency of Haven and then some. It's still not as high as some other ones because it's not quite as consistent. There's some filler tracks here and there, but as a whole, I think this is just a really solid album. Some of my favorites, Amnesiac, Phantom Divine, Burns to Embrace, that's probably my favorite on there. Some other decent ones is In Twilight Hours, Static, Mindful Remedy, Vespertine. So solid consistency. Once again, not quite as many top tiers as some ones to come, but overall, I really enjoy this album. I think a lot of people don't love it, but I don't see it. I think it's pretty darn good. Moving on to number 4. This is another one that oftentimes is cited as people's favorites, and this one I totally understand. Black Halo, a little bit, but this one I think is a really, really good album. And that is Karma. This is the album that I think a lot of people think Fourth Legacy was like the band coming into fruition and like the Kamelot, the great Kamelot style is here. I'd think there's flashes of it in Fourth Legacy, but Karma is the first Kamelot album where I'm like, okay, yeah, I understand why these guys are like classic power metal juggernauts. It's just, they're fun, symphonic, kind of epic style. Like everything that Kamelot does best is manifested in this album. Obviously not to as consistent degrees as the ones to come, but there's some absolutely great stuff in here. Forever, title track Karma, Elizabeth 2 is good, Temples of Gold, Cross the Highlands, Don't You Cry, Wings of Despair. So a really consistent album in its quality. The Light I Shine on You is also good. There's very few, if any, skippable tracks in here. I don't put it as higher as some of the other ones to come because I think other ones have more top tier songs, more memorable ones. I think this is, I appreciate this album for what it did for the band and for it just being just a really solid, interesting album as a whole. But when I think of my favorite Kamelot songs, I don't think maybe the title track Karma, but other than that, I go to other Kamelot albums, but still a really good album overall. Moving on to the top 3. At 3, got another really controversial placing because I've got Poetry for the Poisoned. This was the last album with Roy Khan, and honestly, going into this album, I thought if you would have told me I would put this in my top 3, I would have said you're crazy, because with that kind of album cover and a title like Poetry for the Poison, this sounds like it's going to be some weird edgy stuff, like and it doesn't seem like it at all fits with the more like majestic, grandiose style of Kamelot. It sounds like it's going for way too dark. But honestly, this album for me is kind of the style that they were giving glimpses of in the Black Halo come to its full fruition. It has still like a nice dark edge to it that it inserts, but it still has the core signature style of Kamelot that makes them so good. Unlike most people, I have a ton of fun with this album. I think it's pretty darn solid and might be the most consistent in its quality as a whole. I think there's barely any, maybe like 1 or 2 songs that aren't up to snuff. Like almost every song is at least decent. My favorites from this album, The Great Pandemonium is excellent. I really like My Train of Thoughts, Poetry for the Poisoned. As a whole, I think that big chunk is kind of the weakest part of the album, except for part 2. I really like part 2. Oh, and of course, Once Upon a Time is an excellent closer. There's obviously the rest of the album is just full of solid tracks like Necropolis, House on a Hill, The Hunter Season, If Tomorrow Came, Zodiac. So I think this album is kind of slept on. Maybe it's just me kind of liking uh, this style that is different from the bulk of Kamelot's most famous stuff. But I thought this was a pretty good send-off for Roy Khan, and definitely an album that is worth checking out and that I return to. At number two, I have, I mean, this one was kind of hard to place, but I had to put the most famous Kamelot album, Epica, at number two. I wanted to, lie to myself and put this at number one because this is most people's number one. But I'm just a filthy casual or normie or biased or something because there's another album that's I like more. But Epica, what is there to say about this album? This album is basically just already taking the really great bedrock that Karma put and then just sending it into the sky. It's absolutely excellent. I love the concept theme that Black Halo did in here, and this feels like the kind of the lighter cousin of Black Halo. It's kind of like the more like uplifting, majestic side, and then the Black Halo comes and brings it down and makes it darker. I love the combination of those two albums. And this, like, when I think of like the core style of Kamelot, it's this album. It's Epica. I think this defines everything that Kamelot is. It's also got some of the best Kamelot songs overall. Songs like Farewell, Wander, which is probably the best ballad that Kamelot's done, so beautiful. Lost and Damned is excellent, and my favorite Kamelot song of all time is on this one. I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's, is it Three Ways to Epica or Three Ways to Epica, or maybe it's even Ill Ways to Epica? I really can't tell what's up with the title. Like, why if it's three, why'd they use the Roman numerals 3? Is it signifying a chapter? Is it signifying a number? Like, please somebody comment below and tell me what that title even is. But either way, I think that's an absolutely excellent song. It's my favorite Kamelot song overall. Other good ones, Center of the Universe, The Edge of Paradise, On the Coldest Winter Night, all really solid songs. I would say the one downfall of this album, and the reason why it's not my number one, is it's not as consistent in quality as my number one pick. And, for some people that doesn't matter, but when I judge albums, it's both on, how many top tier great songs do they have and how consistent is it as an album overall. If there's too many tracks in there that just kind of feel like filler that I would just cut out, that does detract a little bit. And I think there's just a little bit too many songs on this album that are just kind of like, yeah, they kind of just feel like they're there just to go with the story and are not too particularly interesting songs on their own. So I think it's great. I understand why it's one of the most classic power metal albums of all time, but it is not my favorite. But yeah, moving on to number one, what is my favorite is their most recent album, The Awakening. I put this at, I believe, number 6 on my favorite albums of 2023. I think if I re-ranked it now, it'd be like, I don't know, maybe 3, maybe even 2. I don't know. It's definitely grown on me even more. And once again, for some reason, all of these newer power metal bands that I'm listening to, or not newer bands, but bands I've been listening to for the first time lately, it's always been their newest album that I like the most. So I've got to think that that's some kind of personal bias, or it's some kind of just me liking the modern sound of power metal more than the classic style. But I really have no idea. I just thought this album was absolutely excellent. There's, I don't know, maybe like 1 or 2 songs that aren't great, so it's incredibly consistent in its quality, and it's also got some of my favorite Kamelot songs overall. Eventide, One More Flag in the Ground, Opus of the Night, Blood Moon, probably my second favorite Kamelot song of all time. Fantastic. The Looking Glass, My Pantheon, all of those are not just good songs, those are absolutely excellent top tier Kamelot songs. Other good ones like The Great Divide. It's just a really solid, really consistent, and really great Kamelot album. This is, I think, the newer style of Kamelot coming to its full potential. They finally got the songwriting on there. They've got the full, like, incredibly upbeat, just epic nature to it. Uh, Tommy Karavik is absolutely at the top of this game. It is just honestly masterfully put together. It is a great album, and it is my favorite Kamelot album overall. But let me know in the comments, how would you rank the 13 studio albums from Kamelot? What did you think of my list? How crazy were some of my picks? And let me know in the comments, what are some other power metal bands or just metal bands you'd like to see me make videos on in the future? But yeah, that is all I've got for today, so I will see you later.